My name is Natalie Klein, and for most of my life, I was the kind of daughter people call easy. Not because my life was easy, because I made everyone else's life easier. I didn't argue at dinner. I didn't demand attention. I didn't complain when plans changed. I smiled in photos. I answered politely when relatives asked what I was doing with my life, even when I knew they didn't really care. In my family, being easy was the closest thing you could get to being loved. My older brother Grant was the opposite. Loud, confident, always certain he deserved more than what he already had. And my parents loved him in a way that felt automatic, like breathing. When Grant wanted something, it became the family's mission. When I wanted something, it became a discussion about why I was being difficult. That difference didn't start when we were adults. It started when we were kids. Grant broke a window playing baseball in the driveway, and my father laughed like it was a funny story he'd tell later. I spilled a cup of orange juice on the carpet, and my mother acted like I'd committed a moral failure. "Be careful," she'd say, voice cold. "Think for once." I learned how to move through the house like a ghost. Quiet steps, quiet voice, quiet wants. What nobody realized back then was that quiet doesn't mean empty. Quiet means observant. My father, Robert Klein, owned a small chain of storage facilities and a modest real estate portfolio that grew slowly over time. He wasn't a billionaire, but he was comfortable. Comfortable enough that people in our town treated him like he mattered. Comfortable enough that my mother, Diane, could host charity luncheons and take credit for community leadership. And comfortable enough that Grant grew up believing he would inherit the world. I grew up believing I'd inherit the responsibility of keeping everyone calm. When I turned 18, I didn't leave town the way most kids do. I stayed close, went to college nearby, worked part-time, helped my mother with errands, drove my father to appointments when his blood pressure started creeping up. Grant, meanwhile, moved to a flashy city and bounced between jobs like a pinball. When he failed, my parents called it finding himself. When I worked hard, my parents called it being safe. It should have made me angry. But anger wasn't allowed in our house unless Grant felt it. So I stored mine somewhere deeper. Then my grandmother died. Her name was Marjorie Klein, and she was the only person in our family who ever looked at me like I was real. She wasn't sentimental. She didn't do fake praise, but she noticed things. She noticed when my mother spoke over me at dinner. She noticed when my father thanked Grant for showing up, but didn't even look at me, despite the fact that I was the one who had driven him there. She noticed when Grant made jokes about me being the spare. And she never laughed. The week after her funeral, my father asked me to come by his office. Not the big office downtown with the glass doors and shiny signs. His actual office, tucked into the back of one of his storage properties, where the smell of dust and cardboard clung to the air. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't sit down like he had time for a conversation. He handed me a folder. "I want you to witness something," he said. Inside was a stack of paperwork, legal, official, heavy with consequences. It was an amendment to a trust, my grandmother's trust, and it had to do with the family properties. I looked up. "What is this?" "Just a formality," my father said. "The lawyers need a witness." I should have asked more questions. I should have been suspicious. But I was still in that old mode. Be easy, be helpful, be quiet. I signed as a witness. Then my father slid another page across. "This one too," he said. I frowned. "This isn't a witness line." He waved it off. "It's nothing. Just a confirmation you received information. The lawyer insisted." I read it. Slowly. It wasn't Nothing. It was an acknowledgement that I had been informed of the trust's terms. It referenced something called the unanimous consent provision. My stomach tightened. "Dad," I said carefully, "what is the unanimous consent provision?" His eyes flickered, just for a second. Then his expression went flat again. "It's legal language," he said. "Don't worry about it." That was the moment I realized my father didn't want me to understand. And when someone doesn't want you to understand, that's exactly when you should. So I did something I had never done in my life. I asked for a copy. My father's jaw tightened. "Why?" "So I have it for my records," I said, keeping my voice calm. He stared at me, then nodded like he was granting a favor. "Fine." He handed me a photocopy. That night, in my small apartment, I read every word. The unanimous consent provision was simple in a way that felt almost elegant. If any property held within the trust was sold, transferred, or used as collateral, it required unanimous written consent from all direct heirs named in the trust. All. Not majority. Not primary beneficiary. All. And I was listed. Not as an afterthought, as a direct heir. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, the paper spread in front of me like a map. My grandmother had done that, not my father. My grandmother had put my name there because she knew something my parents pretended not to. If you remove a person long enough, you start believing they're not capable of holding power. But my grandmother had given me power anyway. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't confront them. I didn't wave the paper around like a threat. I just put it in a folder, tucked it into the back of my closet, and went back to being easy. Because I understood something that felt important. The strongest leverage is the kind no one knows you have. Years passed. Grant got married, divorced, then married again. Every time he needed money, he called my parents. Every time he needed a place to stay, he came home. My mother would complain about him behind his back, then defend him in public like her life depended on it. My father's health declined. He became sharper, more controlling, more paranoid. He started talking about protecting the legacy. The legacy. His favorite word. He'd say it like it was a sacred object he had to pass down to Grant. Then, one winter morning, my mother called me with a voice that didn't sound like herself. "Your father collapsed," she said. "We're at the hospital." I drove there with shaking hands. In the waiting room, Grant was already there, pacing like a caged animal. My mother sat stiffly, lipstick perfect, eyes dry. She looked up when I entered, but didn't move toward me. Grant did. He grabbed my shoulders and said, "If anything happens to Dad, you need to stay out of the way." Out of the way? Even in a hospital waiting room, he spoke to me like I was a hazard. My father survived the collapse, but it scared him. And when people like my father get scared, they start trying to control everything they can. Within a month, he called a family meeting. It wasn't at home. It was at the lawyer's office. That should have been my first clue that it wasn't a meeting. It was a decision. The lawyer, Mr. Henley, sat behind a polished wooden desk like he belonged there. My father sat beside him, hands folded. My mother sat on the other side, posture perfect. Grant leaned back in his chair like he was already bored. I sat quietly, holding my purse in my lap like a shield. My father cleared his throat. "I'm updating my will," he said. "I want everything clean, no confusion, no fighting." Grant smirked. Smart. My father looked at me. Natalie, you've always been independent. There it was. The word they used when they wanted to justify giving me less. I'm leaving the business assets to Grant, my father continued. The storage properties, the rental portfolio, the accounts. Grant will run the company. Grant didn't even pretend to be surprised. My mother nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. I waited for my father to say the part about me. He didn't. The lawyer slid a document across the desk toward me. This is an acknowledgement, Henley said. It confirms you understand your father's wishes. My throat went dry. I looked down at the paper and saw the line that mattered. By signing, I would be waiving any rights or claims related to the estate and trust assets. Waiving. Not acknowledging. Giving up. My fingers tightened around the pen. My father watched me with a calm expression that felt rehearsed. Just sign, my mother said softly, like she was soothing a child. Grant rolled his eyes. Don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing. The family motto. I didn't sign. I didn't refuse dramatically. I didn't tear the paper. I just set the pen down. I want time to review this, I said. My father's face hardened. It's standard. Then reviewing it won't be a problem, I replied. The room went colder. Grant leaned forward. You think you deserve half, after doing nothing? I looked at him, calm. I didn't say that, I said. My mother's voice sharpened. Natalie, we don't have time for your feelings. There it was again. Emotional, difficult, a problem. I picked up my purse. I'll have my attorney review it. My father's eyes narrowed. You have an attorney? I will, I said. I left. In the parking lot, my hands shook so badly I had to sit in my car for 10 minutes before I could drive. I wasn't shaking because I was scared of losing money. I was shaking because for the first time, I understood exactly what was happening. They weren't planning to leave me less. They were planning to erase me legally. And if I had stayed easy, they would have succeeded. That night, I pulled the trust documents out of my closet. I read them again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into a different truth. They didn't. Unanimous consent. All direct heirs. My name was still there. I hired an attorney the next morning. Her name was Priya Shah, and she didn't waste time. She reviewed the papers from my father's lawyer, then looked up at me with a sharp, clear expression. They're trying to pressure you into signing away rights you already have, she said. And they're doing it quickly because they know time favors the person who reads. My pulse steadied. So what do I do? I asked. Priya's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't sign anything. You request full documentation of the trust assets and the estate plan, and you prepare for them to retaliate. Retaliate. That word sounded dramatic. Then it became real. Within a week, my mother stopped answering my calls. Grant blocked me. My father sent me a single text. If you insist on complicating this, you will regret it. Complicating. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how quickly they went from pretending to love me to acting like I was an enemy. But then I remembered. They didn't love me as a person. They loved me as a role. The quiet daughter. The easy one. The one who signed. 2 months later, my father's health crashed again. This time, there was no recovery. He died on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, Grant was in control. The funeral was polished, expensive, public.
My mother cried at the right moments. Grant gave a speech about legacy and strength. People from town came up to me and
said things like, "Your brother will do your father proud," like it was already settled. No one asked how I was, because my grief was inconvenient to their narrative. After the funeral, Henley called me. "We should meet," he said. "Time-sensitive items." I met him in his office. Grant was there. My mother was there. They slid the same waiver across the desk. "Sign," Grant said. "Let's move on." I looked at the document calmly. "Where's the trust disclosure?" I asked. Henley blinked. "The trust is separate." "No," Priya's voice said from behind me. I turned. Priya walked in, folder in hand, and sat beside me like she belonged there, which she did. Henley's posture stiffened. "Ms. Shah?" Priya smiled politely. "Mr. Henley?" Grant's face darkened. "Are you serious?" Priya ignored him. "We're requesting full accounting of trust-held assets, plus any actions taken involving those assets within the last 5 years. My mother's voice was tight. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at her. "Because you're trying to erase me," I said calmly. "And I'm done being easy." Grant laughed, sharp, bitter. "You think you have power? Dad made his decision." I tilted my head slightly. "Did he?" Henley cleared his throat. "The will is clear." Priya opened her folder. "The trust is clearer." She slid a photocopy across the desk. My photocopy. The one my father never thought would matter. Henley's eyes scanned it, and his face changed. Grant leaned forward. "What is that?" Henley swallowed. "The unanimous consent provision." Grant frowned. "So?" Priya's voice stayed calm. "So any sale, transfer, refinancing, or collateralization of trust-held assets requires unanimous consent from all direct heirs." Grant scoffed. "Fine, I'm the heir." Priya tapped the page. "Not the only one." Grant's eyes flicked down to the names. His mouth went slightly open, because there it was. Natalie Klein. My mother's face went pale. "That can't be right," she whispered. Henley looked nauseous. "It appears it is." Grant's voice rose. "Dad wouldn't—" "He did," Priya said, and I felt something settle inside me. Not joy, not revenge lust, just certainty. Grant tried to play it off. "Okay, so she's named. Big deal. We'll buy her out." Priya's expression didn't change. "You can't. Not without her agreement. And there's more." She turned the page. "This trust provision also states that any attempt to coerce, mislead, or obtain signatures under false pretenses can trigger a review clause allowing an heir to petition for injunctive relief." Grant stared. "English." Priya looked at him. "If you try to force her to sign away her rights, she can freeze transactions." My mother's voice shook. "Freeze?" Priya nodded. "Meaning you can't sell properties. You can't refinance. You can't secure loans using those assets. You can't move anything without her." The silence in the room was thick. Grant's face turned red. "This is insane." I spoke softly. "It's not insane. It's legal." Grant slammed his hand on the desk. "You don't even know how to run this!" I met his eyes. "Neither do you." That was when the mask fell. Grant's anger wasn't about fairness. It was fear. Because he didn't want control for responsibility. He wanted it for comfort. And comfort disappears when someone finally says no. I didn't ask for half. I didn't demand a dramatic cut. I didn't want their love. I wanted something much simpler: recognition and accountability. I told Priya to file the petition. The next day, she filed for injunctive relief. Within 48 hours, the court issued a temporary order freezing trust-related transactions pending review. The business, Grant's new kingdom, stopped moving. And you'd be amazed how quickly people panic when their world depends on selling and refinancing things they don't actually understand. Grant called me non-stop. At first, he tried charm. "Nat," he said, like we were close, "we can work this out. Family, right?" I didn't answer. Then he tried intimidation. "You're ruining Mom," he hissed. "You're going to regret this." I still didn't answer. Then my mother came. She showed up at my apartment building like she belonged there. Hair perfect, coat expensive, eyes sharp. When I opened the door, she smiled like she was doing me a favor. "Let's be reasonable," she said. I didn't invite her in. "I am being reasonable," I replied. Her smile tightened. "You always had to be dramatic." I almost laughed. "All I did was stop signing things," I said. She stepped closer, voice lowering. "Your father wanted Grant to have everything." "Then why did he put my name in the trust?" I asked. She flinched, because she didn't have an answer. I could see it in her eyes. She had never read the trust. She had never cared enough to know. She had just assumed the world would obey the story she told. I held the door frame and said calmly, "You tried to get me to waive my rights before Dad even died. That's not reasonable. That's predatory." Her face hardened. "You think you're so smart." I shrugged. "I read. That's all." She whispered, "Sign the waiver. We'll give you something." Something. A bone tossed to a dog. "No," I said. Her voice turned icy. "Then you're not my daughter." The old Natalie would have crumbled. The old Natalie would have apologized. But the old Natalie had been erased for years. I looked at her, calm. "You already treated me like I wasn't," I said. "So nothing changes." And I closed the door. Here's the part people expect next: the dramatic reveal, the public humiliation, the viral moment. But revenge like mine doesn't need an audience. It needs consequences. The court review uncovered what I'd suspected for years. Grant had been quietly using trust assets as collateral through temporary agreements and internal restructuring. Henley had helped. My mother had looked away. They thought they could slide things through because everyone assumed I was irrelevant. They were wrong. The judge didn't care about family dynamics. The judge cared about documents. And documents are honest in a way people rarely are. Grant was forced into mediation. My mother sat in a conference room and cried like it was a performance. Henley tried to negotiate like he still had control. Priya dismantled them calmly. At the end, the settlement was simple. I became co-trustee, not a beneficiary begging for scraps, a gatekeeper. Any transaction required my approval moving forward. Grant kept the title he wanted, CEO, but without the ability to move assets freely, it became exactly what he deserved: a job, not a throne. He hated it. He tried to prove himself. He tried to bully employees. He tried to make bold moves. But every move required paperwork, approvals, scrutiny. For the first time in his life, Grant had to earn what he used to take. The business stabilized, not because Grant suddenly became competent, because I quietly built systems he couldn't sabotage. I hired an operations manager. I separated accounts. I tightened reporting. I required quarterly audits. Grant complained constantly. My mother blamed me in private, but in public, they smiled, because they needed the town to believe everything was fine. Then came the final twist. A year after the settlement, Grant decided he wanted out. Not because he was exhausted, because he was bored. He tried to sell his stake. He tried to cash out and run. He forgot one detail. The trust still controlled the core assets and the unanimous. Consent provisions still applied, meaning he couldn't sell without me. He called me furious. "You're trapping me," he said. I listened calmly, then asked, "Do you remember when you told me to stay out of the way at the hospital?" He went silent. I continued, voice soft. "I did. I stayed out of your way. I just stopped standing under your feet." He hissed, "What do you want?" I didn't want money. I didn't want revenge headlines. I wanted the thing they'd denied me my entire life. The truth. So I said, "I want a written statement." "A statement?" he snapped. "Yes," I said. "From you, from Mom, acknowledging what you tried to do, that you pressured me to waive rights, that you excluded me intentionally, that you misled me." Grant laughed like it was insane. Then he realized I wasn't joking. "You're not serious," he said. "I am," I replied. "If you want your exit, you sign the truth." He called me every name in the book. He told me I was vindictive. He told me I was pathetic. He told me I was just emotional. And I stayed calm, because I wasn't emotional. I was patient. 2 weeks later, he signed. So did my mother. They wrote it in careful legal language, but it was unmistakable. They had tried to erase me. They had failed. And now, on paper, they admitted it. Then I gave consent for Grant to sell his stake, with restrictions that protected the company from his chaos. He took his money and ran, as predicted. My mother moved to a smaller house and stopped hosting charity lunches. People still smiled at her in town, but the warmth was gone. Because even in small towns, stories leak. And once people sense something rotten, they don't look at you the same again. As for me, I didn't destroy them. I didn't have to. I just refused to keep fixing what they broke. The strangest part is how quiet it all was. No screaming matches on TV, no dramatic courtroom scenes for an audience. Just a daughter who read the fine print. Just a signature they thought they could force. Just a family that learned, too late, that the person they dismissed was the only person who could stop them. And if you're wondering whether I felt guilty, I didn't. Because guilt is what people like my mother install in you to keep you compliant. What I felt was lighter than that. What I felt was space. The kind you get when you finally stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's story. They spent years pretending I didn't exist. In the end, my existence was the clause that controlled everything.